Greetings, welcome to Powered by Nyame. I'm your guide and host, Kwesi Kunadu. On this episode, our focus will be on spirituality and reading. And I want to begin with two unrelated stories, but share a common thread and theme that's going to be very important for today's conversation. And so when I was about 10, maybe 11 years old, an aunt of mine who I lived with in some part of Brooklyn had brought over this pastor from a church which he never attended, but she seemed to brought the pastor over because she thought that I was unruly and I needed to be saved. And so she brought him over, and this pastor came to the house and sat down with me and my brother. More so me, my brother wasn't really paying attention. But I listened to him, the pastor, and he went on about all the things that a pastor would say to try to convince me why I should come to church and why I should do this and, what will happen if I don't. And I listened to him. And then I said respectfully, can I ask you a few questions? He said, sure. His eyes lit up because to him, he thought this was going to be, a simply bait that would catch me and reel me in. And so I said, let me ask you a question. In the book that you read, right, the Bible, doesn't it say that Jesus is described as, a figure that has woolly hair, burned reddish or bronze-like skin, and, had other features that doesn't look like the image that you have in your church? He couldn't answer. He was stunned. He stammered for a minute. And I went on to kind of pounce on him with other questions. Now, I wasn't just trying to make him feel lesser than the human that he was. But see, I didn't read much of the Bible, but I read enough to know that, that this was something that I knew. And as it was a question for me, because, you see, my mother had sent me to Sunday school when I came to the United States, living in Brooklyn, in Crown Heights. And this was new for me because I did not go to church before then. Before then, I, was reared in the Kumina tradition of my grandfather in Jamaica. And so this was a new and strange place for me to go to a place called a church. And so I went to Sunday school because my mother made me go to Sunday school. And I didn't pay much attention to, what they did. I couldn't wait to leave and go back home. And so when the pastor came some years later to influence me, I was already equipped with enough to ask some very essential questions based on my prior reading. Now, fast forward, I'm in graduate school and there's a seminar between different universities. I'm at Cornell, but there are students, grad students, who are from Syracuse or from Morgan State and who are from Binghamton. We have this collaborative seminar there. And I remember this one particular seminar when we're discussing the works of Karl Marx, right, and Friedrich Engels. And this is Karl Marx's classical work, for many that are unfamiliar, called Das Kapital. And this is, of course, Karl Marx's magnum opus. This is his signature work, about the workings of capitalism and its evils. And so I'm listening to the discussion, I'm trying to follow along, but it was hard for me to do so, but I didn't say a word because everyone else had, read Karl Marx or read enough of Karl Marx to have an intelligent discussion, but I was just watching in silence because I hadn't read Karl Marx. And I have a thing about me where I don't make a comment or make a statement about something that I don't know, I'm not familiar with. And so because I did not read Marx as yet, I, just sat silent and quiet. Now, what do the two stories have in common? What's the common thread here? The common thread is reading and not reading. You see, many of us often will take a position, take a stance, usually an ideological position, that is a position of belief, and we have not read the very thing which we're taking a position about. And so I noticed that a number of people simply heard this about Karl Marx or heard this about Das Kapital, and I have read the original in German or the English translation, but they heard this that Karl Marx allegedly said, or his partner Frederick Engels allegedly wrote, and they just went with it, having full-on debates and arguments about things for which they have not seen with their own eyes. And so that moment in the seminar was a humbling moment, because I was unprepared, because I didn't read Karl Marx, because he wasn't important to me at that time. But then, of course, I had to read up on my Karl Marx to be able to engage people about Marxism. And likewise, when it came to Christianity, I had not read enough, but I knew a little bit to be able to engage the pastor who, by the way, went home frustrated because his mission had failed. Now, there's a very important connection between spirituality and reading, because spirituality and spiritual traditions, they have both oral and written texts. Oral texts like the Patakin among the Yoruba people. And by Yoruba, I also mean those who are in Nigeria, because the Yoruba spirituality, or spirituality assigned to the Yoruba people, that is the veneration of the Orishas and all the constellations of spiritual entities and forces that are a part of that tradition, stretches into not only Togo and Benin among the Ewe and Fombe people, but also into Ghana and other parts of West Africa. So when I refer to the Yoruba spirituality, I'm not simply speaking about those people who are in Nigeria, including the Edo people in southeastern Nigeria that also practice what is assigned to the Yoruba as their spirituality or spiritual culture. And so among the Yoruba, we have these patakin, these oral narratives and stories about the orishas, or spiritual forces, entities that reside within that particular cosmology. That is a set of beliefs, a set of ideas that are both cosmic in origin, and of course are instructive or pedagogical, meaning they provide particular kinds of lessons, takeaways, if you will, for how we should live our lives and resolve the issues that we confront as human beings. That said, those stories are really no different, I came to discover over the years, are really no different than the parables that are found in the Bible, or that are found in the Quran, that are found in the Buddhist texts, that are found in other kinds of traditions, and even oral texts that are found in other African traditions as well. And so reading becomes a very important fundamental part, because I've seen folks take very strong and very, I'll die on the hill positions about this and that, and they have not consulted or read both the oral traditions and texts or the written traditions and texts for which they're arguing about. And so it's like, fighting, with ghosts. It's a fight that you can't win. And so what I want to do in this episode is to sort of bring our attention to the critical importance of reading and spirituality. That is, how reading a text helps to enhance, help to grow our spirituality, and of course, whatever spiritual culture that you may be a part of. So let's jump right into it. Now, from those two stories, my encounter with that pastor when I was about 11, 12 years old, and my encounter in graduate school, I think I was about my early 20s, as a graduate student at Cornell doing that seminar, is very instructive for all of us. And here's how. You see, many of us have, and let me rephrase it before I continue the thought. Many of us, for good reason, like myself, I've had our hang-ups about even, considering or being a part of a Christian or Islamic practice and faith, right? Much less Judaism, right? And these are, of course, purportedly the three dominant religions that circulate in this world. And for good reason, right? We have, historical experiences. We have the violence of people who practice those particular religions or claim them. And so we have a lot in which to say, well, that's not for me. That will never be for me. But here's something I wanted you to temper that particular kind of position. You see, I, like many of us, didn't want nothing to do with Christianity, and I still don't. And in a moment, it all makes sense, because I believed, many years ago, that, those people that practice Christianity or Islam or other religions were often the most hypocritical about the religions that they claim. B, the claim that they made was often a claim that could not be substantiated, meaning anyone can claim to be anyone that they believe. Or said differently, anyone can make a claim that they believe this or that. There's no need to prove the claim. It's simply just claiming it is enough. And so I found a problem with that as well. And C, you see, the thing about belief is that no one knows what you truly believe in except you and your Creator. No one does, right? Doesn't matter what comes out of your mouth. Doesn't matter what clothing you put on. Doesn't matter what actions or acts you do. No one truly knows what you deeply feel in your heart and your soul except between you and your Creator. So those are the three considerations or factors that make, religions very hard to digest. But I want to share some with you to demystify, for our purposes in this episode. I want to demystify a lot of misconceptions that we have, and then we'll get into, the themes about reading and spirituality. And the mystification, by the way, is a part of how we read. And so the first thing is this. I'm not a Christian or a Muslim, but I respect and I accept God in the form of those particular religions. I'll say it again. I'm not a Christian or Muslim, nor do I want to be. But I accept and I respect God in the visions of those religions. In other words, Christianity or Islam, for instance, have no monopoly over God. No religion does. God doesn't belong to any religion. And that's why I share with people that have asked me before, I'm a son of God, I'm a child of God, I'm a man of God, right? I am he that lives within me, right? And as such, it means that because no religion has monopoly or intellectual property on God, God doesn't belong to any of those religions. What we have been confused by is that those religions make the claim to being the only path to God. And obviously that's incorrect, that's illogical, right? Because everyone, second misconception, must know God for him or herself. By know God for yourself, meaning that that's between you and your deepest part of your heart and soul. Everyone has to have their own personal soul-to-soul relation with God because God lives within us. Just because God is there doesn't mean we have a connection to it. The same way that, we'll feel our heart beat, doesn't mean that we have a heart. And let me break that down for you all, if I lost anyone. Just because we have a physical organ called the heart that pumps blood, that carries rich oxygen and other nutrients throughout the body and feeds the cells, and because our heart pumps and we can feel the heart thudding inside our chest, doesn't mean we have the heart. Doesn't mean we have a heart. Meaning that doesn't mean we have the sort of kindness, reciprocity. That's what I mean by having a heart. So we can have the physical heart, doesn't mean we have the real heart, right? That is the act of kindness, the act of forgiveness, the act of mercy, the act of grace. We don't have those things just because we have a physical heart. Likewise, just because God is in us doesn't mean that we know God. Everyone must know God for him or herself. And that's why religion belongs to each person who chooses the religion, that is, make the claim to the religion. But that claim doesn't mean that that religion has monopoly on God. Quite the opposite. And so the other misconceptions that we have that flows from those misconceptions is this, is that we often believe that what we read, right, is the word of God. So whether it's the Quran or it's the Hadith or it is the Bible or it is the Torah or it is the, you can name it, the Pataki among the Yoruba or other kinds of oral texts among the Akan people, among the Hausa, among the Mande people, among the Bakongo people, among the Zulu people. You have all kinds of different oral and written texts that are there. But guess what? They all share in common. They all share in common that all these stories are changed over time. None is in pristine, unchanged form. In the Quran, for instance, there are editing marks in the 7th century when Islam, as a formalized religion, comes onto the scene. Christianity is born out of a committee's work. That is, the Byzantine Emperor Constantine organized a committee in the Council of Nicaea around the early part of the 3rd decade of the 4th century of the Common Era. to write or decide what books would constitute what we call the Bible. And from there, it was translated into Greek from Hebrew, or Aramaic really, and other forms into Greek, into Latin, of course, eventually into English, Old English, and then, of course, English. And the first English version, of course, authorized by a committee of more than 20 individuals by King James of England. And so all texts written and oral, are, put in place usually by not one person, but by a committee, right? So even if a story has to do, or a parable has to do with a particular figure, right? The authors of that particular parable, right? Over time, the authors, right? People begin to fashion it or refashion it to fit new circumstances. And so, though all of these stories represent, in a sense, the Word of God, because the Word is what essentially initiates creation, right? And think about it. In all traditions between ancient Egypt or Kemet, let's broaden it out, the Nile Valley, that is from the delta in the north, where the Nile drains into the Mediterranean Sea, all the way south to the origins of the Nile, and the Nile has two origins, the Blue Nile that comes from the Ethiopian highlands, and the White Nile that comes from Uganda. So these two Niles essentially merge as it flows. On your map, it looks like north, but it's really south into the Mediterranean Sea by the delta. And so the Nile Valley, that entire valley region, right? The belief systems, that is the spirituality and spiritual culture in that region, right, begins with the notion of the word, the utterance, right? The sort of acoustics, the vibrations, the energy that essentially sparks and triggers creation out of what? Out of water, out of a formless, dark void. And that notion of a formless, dark void of water that then begins to take shape through the acoustics of the word, of the acoustics of the sound, right? The vibratory energy is what brings essentially shape to the shapeless, right? It gives something to where there is, a sense of material nothing that is there. And so that's found in the Nile Valley. It is found in the biblical texts. It is found in other African oral traditions. And so these all refer to some common themes that come from reading these oral and textual traditions in tandem. In other words, we can't read in isolation. If you want to be a person who is spiritual, a person who has a mature spirituality, a person that is a child of God, then we have to, my argument here is that we have to read in tandem. And when we read in tandem, when we read across traditions, what you find is that there are these common threads that speak to, again, the principles, the salient ideas or the core ideas that belong to God, that belong to the practice of being a child of God, right? Now, I'll make it more practical for us. And so in a very practical way, these notions of void and darkness and form and water and taking shape is found across these oral traditions. And so, for example, among the Yoruba, you have Olodumare. You also have, another version, which is Eledumare, right? That refers to creator of all things. So this creative force, so that this God in the form, right, of this creative force of the cosmos, right, begins to fashion the world out of that water. The same is true for other traditions. And what's equally important is that speech is the method or mechanism through which everything comes into existence, right? That is the breath of life, the utterance, right? Speech is what brings them. And that comes back to our theme of reading. And so reading across traditions, both oral as well as written texts, allows us not only to develop and enhance our spiritual practices and our spirituality, it also gives us tools in which to work with. For this episode, I've been your guide and host. Until next time, stay well. Drop your questions in the comments below.